Hello, I'm really thrilled to be here today. I'm Susan Nash, AAPG, and it is just a huge pleasure to be here in anticipation of the Orphan Well Conference. It's our fourth annual Orphan, Abandoned, Idle, and Marginal Wells Opportunities with Legacy Assets. And today we are very lucky to have Lonnie Kennedy and also Steve Tedesco, who will be talking to us about their experiences with legacy assets and the opportunities that are there to find wells that are potentially productive, and also to look at the entire life cycle of the field and the wells and the boreholes. So I'd like to mention, first of all, that you will receive an email with a link to this recording and also a link to be able to register for our conference that will be in Tulsa, February 25th and 26th, and it will be at the Hyatt. We're expecting an amazing turnout, and I want to particularly thank our platinum level sponsor, and that is Well Done Foundation. And I was hoping that Curtis Shuck would be here today, but he's not, so I'm disappointed about that. But I'm really glad that he will be here. And then for the conference. And then I'd also like to mention that you will get a copy of the recording, and you'll be able to watch the video on demand, and you can also share it with your colleagues. So thank you, and I'd like to invite Lonnie to share his screen.
Very good. Thank you so much, Susan.
Perfect.
Great. Yeah, thank you very much for attending. I really appreciate it. So today I want to talk to you about the application of three-dimensional modeling to old oil fields. And my contention is that in doing so, you're basically looking at old oil fields with new eyes. So overview, what I'm going to talk about is that, old fields are a growing problem, and geology is often old and it degrades with time. So what do I mean by degrades? So, maybe the people that drilled in the 40s or 50s understood what the geology was all about. But these properties over time, as the production has gone down, they've been handed from person to person to person. So maybe it's the third operator on a particular site. And by the time he picks the site up, he doesn't really often have much of an understanding as to what's below his feet. And so his main goal is simply to make sure the wells are pumping and that they're somewhat profitable day to day. So many operators really don't know what they have below their feet. And unfortunately, there's not a lot of money to be spent for newer technology, let's say like seismic. But what about using your old data in a new way? So a lot of these fields have got tons of old wells with logs. And because of their age, most of these logs are paper. But you can these days relatively inexpensively convert those logs into a digital format. And it's expensive. And once you do that, that will allow you to begin looking at in a new way at the geology. And I like to use three-dimensional geocellular modeling. And so I'm going to show you an example of that as we go along, so it'll become clear what I'm talking about. But overall, that's going to let you look at the field and discover a lot of new potential that you may have otherwise missed. So orphan wells in just Oklahoma, mind you. So officially, as of today, we have 23,000 orphan wells scattered across the state. And by the way, this map is only showing the orphaned wells and the inactive wells that we have in Oklahoma. So you can see quite a few. There's 150,000 wells that are technically inactive. These are wells that haven't produced in many, many years. And if you were to look at the wells that are classified as active, but they're really marginal, so they're producing a barrel a day or so, there's even more. So, you may have just in Oklahoma a couple of 100,000 wells that can fall into this category. And our state doesn't really want to force plugging, but eventually, as I mentioned, these properties get handed down from person to person to person, and literally some of the operators die off, and the state is left holding the bag. So a good thing for everybody, the state, residents, operators, is to reactivate, find a way to make the old wells profitable. So with respect to geomodeling, the actual process of geomodeling isn't new. It's been around for maybe 20 years or so. But what has more recently become available is digital data. So if you can take digital data, and then another thing now is that the software has become really nimble for modeling, and that our computer power has also become sufficiently strong to be able to run these sophisticated programs with lots of data in it. And all of that information can feed into a skilled geologist. And a geo with the right software, data, and hardware can generate some absolutely fabulous three-dimensional models of the reservoir. So instead of looking at things in as a flat map or a cross-section, you're able to look at the reservoir as a whole in a three-dimensional manner. And if you take that along with reservoir savvy, so get those results and then understand what they're telling you, that will translate into making some money. So why would we want to go in and model some of these old field areas? So one of the great reasons is that a lot of field areas are really rich in well density. So maybe you don't have other types of information, but you've got tons of wells that are present in the field that gives you a lot of information to base your model on. So there's lots of oil in these fields. Sometimes these were world-class fields back in their day, but the oil was extracted inefficiently, which means there's a lot of oil remaining in the system if you can just figure out where it's at. And today, nobody's really interested in these areas. The bigger oil companies are off drilling horizontal wells 3-4 miles long, really expensive, and they're not really interested in going back into these older areas. So it's a low cost of entry. So in some cases, you might be able to pick up the wells for free. It's relatively low risk. I mean, I've seen people go into some of these fields and just go drill a new well in an old field. And most of the time that well is going to pay for itself. And then occasionally it's going to win big. So that's like going to Vegas, and every time you lose a bet, the house gives you back your money. And then, when you win, you win. So those are great odds. And often there's secondary reservoir potential. So you could have tight formations or unconventional formations that are behind pipe that weren't economic at the time, but today is something you could do with it. So those reservoirs might be able to be exploited with newer technology. And again, as I mentioned, so the understanding generally is outdated for a lot of these fields, or maybe non-existent at all. So doing the right type of reservoir study can really give you a hand. And key to this is, as I mentioned earlier, is converting paper data into digital information. So today it is relatively inexpensive to take paper logs like the one I'm showing here and have that digitized over into a LAS file, a digital data, and then be able to bring that information into a model where you can analyze it, the petrophysics in much more detail, and then bring that into the three-dimensional context where you can be able to visualize things more easily. So I've got a lot of examples, but I'm just going to give you one here from the Oklahoma City region, which is just a project that I recently finished. So it's an example of what you can do with old data that was originally paper put into a three-dimensional system. So for this particular field, we're looking at a chart of historic production. So you can see the wells were drilled back in the 1980s. There were 20 wells that were drilled, and at one point in time, there were 200,000. These wells were making about 200,000 barrels a year. Not too bad. It went through a normal decline period, and then about 1986, they came in and started to do a water flood in this area, and they were capable of stabilizing production for about 10 years, and then it fell like a rock. So there's different reasons for that fall. But at the end of that, they were looking to abandon the field, and the current operator basically picked up the field for not too much money, and then it went around the process of basically just keeping the wells pumping. So he just made sure they're operating, and so he's getting about 3,000 barrels a year out of these wells. So he did stabilize the production, and that's always one thing to note, that if you've got reasonable production that's very long life, then that's an indication that you may have a lot more oil in the system that you could get out faster. So this is a bit of a long video about that field and how it's been developed. So the state of Oklahoma, and the project is in Oklahoma County and in the town of Edmond. So you can see it's really well developed, lots of buildings. And so the operators are constrained to relatively small patches to do their work. And so what I've done now is just turn that off, and we're looking at the actual wells for the project. The red box is the unit area. The white wells that are in there are injectors for only the unit. You can see there's a lot of horizontal wells that have been put in there because of the limited operations areas. And then what we've done here is, again, paper copies went to digital, and then digital is log information is then appended to all the wells. So for this example, it's gamma ray. So once that information's in there, we can analyze the logs in a fairly straightforward manner. You're looking at just gamma ray and resistivity. So I'm picking tops just like anybody else would pick. So top of the Bartlesville, which is the pay sand, and the bottom of the Bartlesville, which is on top of the Hunton Formation and is there unconformable. So there's a really wide depositional system of delta deposits and then channel sands that cut into it. And I'm just going to scroll along some of the wells here, and you can see how widely varied the deposition is for the area. And by the way, these little yellow bars in the center here, you'll see them sometimes as red in the 3D model, are the perforations. So again, you get an idea as to the high amount of variability and distribution of these sand systems. So going back to the three-dimensional model, and again, now you're looking at the gamma ray logs in 3D. All the other logs are in there. So density, whatever else is in the wells is now there. So I picked the tops, and these discs represent the formations that I picked. So from those tops, I built a structural model on the top, on the top of the Hunton base of the Bartlesville, and then another one on the top of the Bartlesville. So that's good. You can see so far we've been looking at a 1-to-1 vertical to horizontal. And what I've done here, get back to the model, is I've increased the vertical scale to be 10-to-1 now. So again, you can see the top of the Bartlesville, that's the upper surface, and the bottom of the Bartlesville setting on the Hunton Formation. So that's that. And so I've defined now the top and bottom of my model. And what's cool when you do the three-dimensional model is that now I can create a volume. So I can divide this up into millions of individual cells and distribute the log properties for the petrophysics using geostatistics into the third dimension. So now we're looking at the gamma ray volume. The scale is on the right, going from 0 to 150. And another example of the volume is porosity. So this is now colored from 0 to 30% porosity. And so again, really interesting stuff begins to pop up. So I've got all the properties modeled in 3 dimensions here. So about anything that you would normally do. I've turned off all the wells except for the ones that are literally inside the unit for the time being. And you can see again the unit that we're working in. So this allows me, for example, to make a fence diagram by slicing through the model, and I can project onto this fence diagram various properties. So this one is gamma ray, again from 0 to 150. The yellowish stuff is going to be cleaner formations. The grayish stuff is going to be silty. And you can begin to see the relationship between the injection wells in white and their perforations in red and the producing wells. So this is facies. So again, splitting that up, and then I can take the same model and break that up into lithology, which is conditioned by facies. So from clean sand, silty sand, silt, shale, organic shale, we can begin to look at the different patterns between the wells. And now we're looking at porosity. So now you can really begin to see where are the porous intervals and how do they relate from injectors to producers. Same thing with oil saturation. So I've got oil saturation. The best areas with high oil saturation are, of course, the orange. There is an oil-water contact here, which I can easily put in, and you can visually see where that contact is. However, most of the wells are above the actual oil-water contact, and so the low oil saturation, high water saturation is just irreducible water, bound water. So now a really key thing that I do then is I take the volume of porosity and I multiply that times the volume of the oil saturation, and what I create from that is a hydrocarbon pore volume. So it's the fractional percent of the porosity that contains oil. So in this case, the scale only goes from 0 to 0.2. We're going to come back to that in just a minute. But I've got a 3-dimensional model here. And so, for example, we're looking at the most of facies that for all the wells. And since that is distributed in 3-dimensional space, I can now begin to create maps from a 3-dimensional volume. So what I've done is I've projected the most common facies onto the bottom of the Bartlesville Formation. And so we can then begin to see the general depositional system of marine, delta facies, channel sands, etc. Okay, and we're going to do the same thing now with oil in place. So we're going back to looking at the hydrocarbon pore volume. With this pore volume, I can then take and squeeze all of the oil out of the formation and push that down onto the surface at the bottom of the Bartlesville. So now I can see original oil in place, which is in barrels per acre. And I can also look at the cross sections and see where the hydrocarbon pore volume is. So I can see both where the majority of the oil is in a flat surface, but also at the same time looking at it in the cross section. So it's pretty cool. And this is set up, the way I do this is I set this up in barrels per acre. So turning on now just the square miles, section lines in white, and 40 acres plots in the lighter white lines. So this shows where the oil was, since it's original oil in place, but what's left? I mean, that's the question that we really want to get at. So one thing that I like to do is that you can estimate the radial drainage of any well if you happen to know how much oil is produced, which we do, the formation volume factor, which we have, and the original oil in place. So that's what's gone on here is now I've estimated the radial drainage for all of the existing wells, and you can see that most of the time those circles are about 40 acres. So these wells have drained by depletion their original unit spacing, so they've done what they're supposed to do. But we should actually have larger circles if they're doing secondary recovery. And there's large regions that have been, now you can see that are underdeveloped. So places where there's oil in place, but no production. And as I say, the wells in the center of the unit have done okay on primary, but they really haven't produced well on secondary. So now I can ask the model to give me the total amount of oil that's in the unit, which is 17 million barrels. It's only produced 1.38 million barrels, so it's only recovered 8%. So the potential primary production that we can get out of this field is 1.16 million barrels. And we could bump that up to probably about 2.85 million barrels by applying both primary and secondary in the field. So one last thing, and that is that the formations here stack very nicely. So I'm just turning on different layers. So I'm starting off with the Bartlesville and then the top of the Hunting base of the Bartlesville, the Sylvan Formation, Viola Formation, and we're going to get down to the Wilcox, which has traditionally been the prized formation for the area. So the Wilcox is about 100-foot thick, beautiful, virtually uncemented sand formation. And one of the things on this operator's property is that he's got a nice little structural feature that is identified by the shallower wells. And he actually has two wells that were drilled over this structure that did not go deep enough. So those two wells have missed an opportunity by only 500 feet. So my estimation is that he could get another 1.8 million barrels by deepening two existing wells by only 500 feet. And the next trick is to get out of this. And sorry about that.
You might have to share again.
Yeah, it looks like it. Sorry about that.
Oh, that's okay. This is really interesting. While you're getting that going, I just want to say that a lot of times it is kind of a, a revelation to find out what's left behind and also the what's behind pipe.
Exactly. And I'd like to say that I have done these types of studies on numerous different fields. Every time you find something that is really economic to do. And so that's it. So that's the last slide I've been struggling to get at. And really the conclusions are that, our digital data, computing power, and sophisticated software, all of that stuff has come together really just in the last few years. And converting old paper logs into digital allows you to use newer technology at a low cost. So in these older fields, we've got lots and lots of oil, and it's perfect for modeling, lots of oil and lots of data. So, and as I say, modeling, every time I've done it, we found a lot of opportunity. So, and just in the example that I'm showing you, we have bypassed reserves, we have means of improving secondary recovery, we have deeper pay potential. There's actually a couple of shallower zones that are in this play as well. So, and of course, obviously, the conclusion is that, doing modeling on old areas just gives you a new way to look at the field and lots of profit potential. So that's it for me. I guess I'm in question mode.
Thank you. Well, Steve, would you like to share your screen?
Okay.
Great. So that was that was really great, Lonnie, and lots of questions are coming in, not only here in Q&A, but also even in LinkedIn. And one of the questions is that whether or not there's interest in if your method takes into consideration surface opportunities. Okay, great. Steve is sharing. Well, we can save all that.
Okay,
Perfect.
shall I start?
Yes, absolutely.
Okay,
Welcome.
so thanks to everyone for attending. What I'm going to talk about is opportunities in abandoned or marginal properties. Basically, I'm going to show you a history of some of the stuff that Running Foxes has done over the past 26 years, 27 years. And a couple of things are actually wildcatting that we've done, but it's what I'm trying to show is there's a lot of opportunities in areas that don't have shale plays. The problem recently has been in the past 5 or 6 years is finding money for conventional targets, whether it's re-entering old fields or exploring new areas. All the money seems right now to go to hydrogen and shale plays, which have their own issues. So to start with, our approach is to find production, abandoned fields, or projects as economically as possible with simple geology and engineering, and then find partners. A lot of my partners are from Europe. I have been talking to some Asian partners lately. Typically, their rate of returns, especially in Europe, is like a half to 1% because of all the taxes and rules and regulations. So they love properties over here because in the downturns, if they're making 3 or 4% here, it's still more than what they'd make in Europe. You want partners with non-competitive technical teams. It leads to a lot of conflict, in my opinion, because you bring in people who really have not worked the area or have limited experience, and suddenly they bring in ideas that sometimes work, but majority of the times are applicable to the areas they work in. So we have to think of this as a baseball game when you're dealing on this sort of end of the industry where you're going after older assets, is that it's like a baseball game where you're getting walks and singles to win the pennant rather than trying to hit for a home run every time. So I look at drilling and completion from the standpoint of being less than 10,000 feet, preferably above 4,000 feet. Area minimal drilling problems, simple completions, simple surface issues, no split minerals, and states with good regulation environment. So this is the history of partly the history of Running Fox. There's some projects here that I haven't mentioned. We were heavily into coal bed methane for a long time, but the price of oil is on the top, price of gas is on the bottom, and we were during one of the downturns. We were the only one drilling in Colorado, which I got all sorts of contractors calling me who would never return my call. And same in Kansas, we were the only company drilling for about 6 months in both states. So this is what we're going to talk about today. The project areas that we look at are Forest City, Sedgwick, Uncompahgre Uplift, Denver Basin, Cherokee, Central Kentucky. They've been good money makers for us. The Illinois Basin is another one, but their regulatory climate is not very good. Colorado has gotten okay. It's come down from being really bad, but right now we're staying out of there just because of the costs and that sort of thing in terms of permitting wells. First field I want to talk about is Living Good. This is in Northeast Kansas. This field basically had been producing since 1949. It's made about 200 and some thousand barrels of oil over time. We came in, the field had stopped producing in 96. The owner was actually a small specialty oil company out of Council Bluff, Iowa, that put the oil in jars and sold it for some purpose. Anyway, the owner died, and we picked up the field for 20K. And then in the process, we shot a 3D. We actually drilled 2 wells before we shot the 3D, and they were marginal producers in their own right. But we got the field going again. And then what we also discovered by shooting the 3D was a Hutton bioherm, as you can see on the bottom right, seismic, that brought in half of the oil we found, and it came on at 260,000 barrels a day. So yes, sometimes 3D is not possible because of money considerations, but in places like this, and this is carbonates, structural wrench faulting, Hunton and Viola. The Hunton's more of a isolated bioherm reservoir, and the Viola is more of a fractured reservoir across the structure. We did drill the southern structure, and to date, the one well was dry, but there was a lot of oil shows in the shales and the carbonates in the bottom, but we determined it was not producible at the time. So that's one field we turned around. Runamuck is another one where we started trying to turn around, but COVID hit. Same sort of thing. It's in the Forest City Basin across the border into Missouri. We shot some 2D seismic, a partner did. We wanted 3D. Unfortunately, it made it very tough to get additional money people in because they all want to see 3D. And then COVID hit, and we've added some production to the field by operating some wells, but it shut down in COVID, and we're actually just now starting to get it going again. One of the other problems we have in some of these quieter areas is that there's now a lack of vendors, or there's very few vendors. Now, this is a field that we went out in a shale play in southeast Colorado, targeting the Excello shale of the Cherokee and the Artoka shales. And in the process, we shot a 3D, and people think I had some brilliance here, but it's basically it was luck. And I find most people are lucky rather than smart when they find oil sometimes, which I'm okay with. Anyway, we found a wrench fault system. The first well came on at over 400 barrels a day. The field has produced, I believe, over 3 million barrels. We had a hell of an override that we ended up selling. The field has passed through 3 or 4 people's hands now. They tried water flooding it, and I'm not sure why they wanted to water flood a fractured carbonate, but regardless, that failed. It was on the south side of the fault. And then where it says discovery well, the 3 wells inside that red series of fractures, they made about 65 to 70% of the oil. So it's very important, in my opinion, is that you have 3D so you can see what's going on with what's in the subsurface, and it helps you to predict what to drill or not drill. And we didn't drill the wells. We were just we sold out to our partner, and they just, because they're a public company, they try to drill everything in order to keep the stock up. These 2 fields we came across while drilling for coal bed methane in southeast Kansas. The left field is Devon. Basically, this field had a little gas leg in section 31 back in the 70s. We hit a nice well with oil in the pits, like 20 barrels. And this field is only at 450 feet. We since went on to develop it. Right now, most of the production is actually the only production is in the southeast corner of section, what was that? Section 36. And the reason is that there's a minor structural or small structural high along the bigger structural, and that seems to be where the best production is. And we've made over 100,000 barrels of oil from this field. It's been difficult to flood because it has 4 pays, and we're trying to work to correct that. And then, oh, I'm sorry. And then the field on the right is the Thomas field. And we found this same thing, drilling for coal bed methane in the area. Coal bed methane was successful, but this field originally was drilled in the 70s. The person who drilled it put in 8 wells, got 1,000 barrels of primary production, then used an engine, a car engine, to put in CO, carbon monoxide, in the ground to try to move it. Unfortunately, it didn't work out, or fortunately in my case. We went on to drill this, and then the southern area we still have under lease, but we haven't been able to develop it because of lack of funds. But the northern area, we've easily produced over 150,000 barrels from 210 feet. So these can be very lucrative to find these old fields, whether the wells are plugged or not. Now, this is 2 fields in Grand County, Utah. We've been chasing helium here, but it didn't start out that way. We bought the field on the right, which is Cisco Springs Field, next to the Cottonwood Valley Thrust Fault. And then eventually, about 6 years ago, we bought the Cisco Dome field. And Cisco Dome was a major gas field for the area. And we got it back to producing gas. The Cisco Dome, we were producing oil and gas from. And essentially, this is on the Uncompahgre uplift on the northern side of the Paradox Basin. There are 2 types of oil in here, and one is Pennsylvanian oil, which obviously is migrated from the Paradox Basin, and the other is very green oil, that's Dakota. Now, this area hasn't been very deep, but we suspect it's been local generation from heating events. But we have some people from Arizona State, I believe, working on that sort of work, isotope work. They're going to publish some papers and doing isotopes, trying to figure out exactly what happened here over time. So we went in, eventually, we've had this field for 20 some years, and I eventually sold it to my partners who've been doing the recent drilling. I actually had a couple other partners in here, and like everything, they were public companies. And then things didn't go right. They turned it back, but we made production. Then we sold to someone else and did the same thing. We shot a 2D seismic uh, shoot here rather than 3D because it's on BLM, and the cost of doing environmental work for 3D was just absolutely outrageous. The 2D worked better. We've got a lot of really good detail on this fault system. And subsequently, we noticed that in this area, because we're next to Harley Dome, let me back up one. Up here, I don't know if you can see my cursor, but right up here above my head is the Harley Dome. And that used to be one of the main helium producing fields in the country. It was found very early back in the 60s or 50s. It's made, excuse me, a couple 100,000 MCF of helium. And recently it was shut in by the owner because they merged with somebody, and we're in the process of buying it. Subsequently, at the time we started looking at helium when it became really hot 5 years ago, we noticed there was a lot of helium numbers in the shallow Dakota. Harley Dome produces from the Entrada, which is below it, and it's a sheet sand, and the Dakota is channel sands, fluvial sands. Same with Cisco Dome. But what's interesting, Cisco Dome has no helium in the shallow gases, none whatsoever, whereas Cisco Springs has really almost economic helium in the Dakota. So on the right is the typical strat column. The main oil and gas targets are the Dakota Sands, the Cedar Mountain, Salt Wash, Brushy Basin. The Entrada produces oil from one or two wells on top of Cisco Dome. It's actually a candidate for a major water flood. There's several wells with this Entrada, but it's just thick oil. But the Harley Dome is in the Entrada, and that's what we started looking at. And if you look up here on the northern western edge, there's the structure for Cisco Springs goes straight and then suddenly turns abruptly to the left. Sort of actually, and I didn't present it here like we see Harley Dome. Anyway, so there's a structure up here that we tested, and you can see the seismic. The helium survey looked pretty good. And you can see how the structure is coming along here and then does something funky. But here's the mud log, great helium shows. The Entrada porosity, resistivity is suppressed because we were at 10.1 pound mud. This was what happens when you bring in partners. Sometimes the people have an own idea. We kept telling them to drop the weight, they get better shows, but we are going to test it hopefully next week or the week after. We also found another pay zone that's virgin reservoir pressure. There's several wells in this section that have produced very good gas, but they're all producing from different sands. So it's a fluvial system. It's like a box of chocolates, as Forrest Gump says. You never know what you get. So it's really exciting because this could be similar to Harley Dome. Hopefully make a couple 100,000 MCF of helium, which is equivalent to like 40-50 million dollars. And this is at 2,400 feet. And Harley Dome's at 850. The next one is the prospect's going to be drilled next week. It's just down the fault system. It's more of an oil project. I noticed the hydrocarbon surveys there. And then the seismic shows the faulting and fracturing. We've used Petroson on both. If nobody knows what that is an electromagnetic method. It's considered black box, but it's been very successful for some people. And in both cases here, we've gotten good, strong responses from that. So we're very hopeful here that we'll find a good Dakota sand full of oil, because that's what I was trying to do, is drill up dip from the main oil wells. And then something deeper, the Petroson shows a very strong anomaly towards the basement. So maybe there's something big down there. And then the last thing, what are we doing now? Well, we're plugging wells in Kentucky, but we're also chasing these type of structures in Kentucky in remote areas. We've also been looking at buying production and putting in water floods. We're doing that now and buying old gas fields that are, if someone doesn't do something with them, they'll be abandoned, that they've never had any really good work on, sort of what Lonnie was saying in terms of operators have different approaches. And God knows what how they come to their approaches sometimes. But we're looking for these sort of things, combinations, staying away from the shale plays and all the resource plays, because we don't have $10,000 an acre and we don't want to pay for $5 million fracks. That's another point is everything we do, we never do any fracking. It's either going to produce the way it is, or it's probably, in our opinion, not producible. So finally, we go after low-hanging fruit, could be abandoned wells. There's a lot of abandoned fields in the various areas we work for. The problem with some of them is that have already been water flood is some of the injectors you don't know where are. And they make great fountains when you start trying to put water in the ground. Lack of competition, simplistic engineering, simple reservoirs, pro-industry states, predictable reservoirs, quality field people, vertical integration, low land costs, and low vendor costs. Thank you for coming, and I await your questions.
That was fantastic. And we have lots of questions. And I think we had at least 10 or 12 questions that said essentially the same thing. And that was for you, Lonnie. Lonnie, what is um, the software that you use for modeling, 3D modeling? And they were talking about how Petrel is so expensive. So what are you using?
Hmm. That's a good question. And so the software that I'm using comes from Baker Hughes. It's called Joule. They're unfortunately they're all expensive, but I have found that Joule is much less expensive than Petrel is. And they'll work deals with people. So you may even be able to get like short-term licenses and things like that. And I like the way their software works. So it's very intuitive. And it has some technical advantages, including the fact that the structural surfaces are, instead of being based on cubes, squares, they're triangular. And so you get very close matches to surfaces, to fault surfaces. I say it's a very useful and easy to use software compared to some of the others, less expensive.
Oh, that's really good to know. And Lonnie, I'll get with you because I'd like to maybe contact them and see if we can get some pricing for AAPG members.
Oh, sure. Yeah, that's a great idea. I can help.
Yeah.
Yeah, I have good contacts with those guys. So
Okay, great, great. Um, so Steve, what do you use for modeling?
Uh, we use Surfer, Grapher, um, Jack Bowler's logging suite. I forget what the name of it is. JLog for that sort of thing.
Does it work
Um,
pretty well?
yeah, they're also cheap. So,
That's a plus.
but
Yeah, I'll
it's
get with
okay
you
for a
and
small independent.
yeah, and maybe and I guess I haven't checked into them in a while, but I guess you can still get licenses from them.
Oh yeah, they what they didn't do until about 5 years ago, they now have a quarterly license to use to get the updates, which is about under $300 for each program. So that's a lot less than a lot of other programs.
Yeah, slightly less than Petrel. Okay, great. And I do know that if you're a member of the Mid-Continent um, Geological Library, you can go if you're in Oklahoma City, and some of the other libraries are like this, that they have a few stations that you can sit and use their databases and also the software.
Mm.
So
I'm gonna,
anyway,
I'd like to give a quick shout out to the Mid-Continent Library in Oklahoma City. Which is, I tend to work Oklahoma, but, also down Texas and other places. But the log library in Oklahoma City has got really good coverage of logs in these older areas. So they're inheriting a lot of the stuff coming from the Tulsa library. So they've got very good, and they're scanning most of their logs to raster files. And so like you may have 80%, 90% coverage in a lot of areas as raster files, which you can take those raster files and those easily converted into digital format And I'll toss out that like the guys that I use for doing log to digital conversion, they only charge $14 a curve. So you pick your curves out, and so you're probably talking somewhere around $50 to convert a log from paper over to digital, which then gives you a lot of advantages.
This is great. Okay, so there was a question and then it came in and moved away. But the question is, but I remember the question, so that helps. Anyway, it was another software question asking about the type of software you use for petrophysical calculations and log analysis.
Well, I use JLog.
Okay,
It's out. Jack Bowler is out of Denver. He's ex-Schlumberger. He's been selling his software for decades. Really good guy. Very good customer support.
that's good to know. Lonnie, what do you use?
Yeah, so the petrophysical analysis is built in to Joule. So you basically just load your digital logs in, and then you can there's a calculator that you can go in and program into that your various equations. So I mean that's one of the advantages of doing it like that is you can use petrophysics on all your wells at one time in the project. So you may have to go back to individual wells and check things, but it's an advantage. You get all the information in there. You're pretty much working across the entire field on your petrophysics. So
Oh, interesting.
the time it takes you to do one well, you can do them all, basically.
That's good.
Yeah.
Well, so another software question. Do you have either of you have any familiarity with the geomodeling software called Rockworks or Leapfrog?
Rockworks I used years ago, but I've gone to Surfer, and actually I don't really model like Lonnie does. Um, a lot of times there's a real lack of data on a lot of our areas that we go into, like the shallow oil fields, the water flood. And so it's, they don't even have logs. That's one of the downside to orphan wells. I know there's people thinking that you can use them for anything, but probably 80% of them in these older areas don't have any technical data downhole. And you're running a risk if you go back in there and try to do anything, whether it's put biochar down there or all sorts of other fun things, because you just don't know what's going down in the wellbore.
That's a really good point. And you mentioned too that in some of the cases, not having any idea of the borehole integrity means that when you do water flood, you get fountains.
I've
Can
had
you
a
go
couple
into
of
more
those.
can
Yep.
you go into more detail about that and how to avoid it?
Some cases you can't avoid it. We in the Thomas field, we had a well that was one of the previous ones we started seeing water bubbling to the surface. It wasn't coming out in a fountain, but it essentially we had to go in and spend quite a bit of money finding it and putting cement in it to plug it. And actually, we ended up reducing the injection pressure around that well old location because they didn't plug it properly, or we don't know what they didn't do right. But the states are getting more aggressive nowadays in how you plug wells. They're trying to get all these wells plugged, whereas before, like the Living Good field I showed, it was sitting, not reporting production for since 1996, and when we picked it up in 20 something. And now the state is really, Kansas is, and Oklahoma is, and several other states are really, in Kentucky, are pressuring to get wells plugged if you let them sit more than 4 or 5 years. Um,
Hmm.
they're trying to make sure the operators is still around so they can make them pay for it rather than being left with all these orphan wells. So
That's a really good point. Okay, so I have several questions on the main topic of like, what is the main criteria? What are the main criteria for well selection or field selection when you start looking for opportunities in these fields? Lonnie, do you want to take that one?
Sure. Yeah. So, I mean, you're going to go into it as a broad brush. looking at everything from a broad brush perspective. So, you want to have an area that had a lot of oil in it to begin with. And you can do just some rough estimations as to how much oil there is in place in a lot of these areas. And then if you can get your cumulative production data out, then you can do some pretty easy calculations on what your estimated recovery factor is of the oil in place. So that's not as difficult as a person might think. So you go in and you start looking at fields and you see that wells have 4%, 7% recovery of the oil in place. Okay, those start to be regions where you look at it and say, yes, there could be some bypassed oil. Another really interesting area is that there are lots of areas, lots of fields that are very complicated stratigraphically. Okay, so what you're looking at will be, sand, silt, shale, formations that are really varied over space. And they may all call it the same formation. You may have a 300-foot, 400-foot formation with lots of different zones in it. And that type of environment is very difficult to do with traditional geologic mapping. I mean, you're going to try to come in and follow a lens for a certain distance, and then it pinches out, and then another lens picks up. Okay, and how do these things all stack up and link to each other? And it's a three-dimensional problem that you can't handle very well as a human looking at it in a two-dimensional manner. And so those offer great opportunities. I've had several areas where we've been able to find new wells with several 100,000 barrels a well that you couldn't find looking at them any other way. So
That's really interesting. That reminds me of Pennsylvania sands in the, say, eastern Oklahoma or East Texas.
that's right. Yeah, yeah. And just on the example that I was showing there, there are places where you get a particular lens of sand that is relatively isolated. Maybe it had one well in it, and maybe that one well that was put in it was put in as an injector, but its porosity doesn't correlate. It doesn't extend laterally into any producer. So it's a bad injector, or vice versa. You get a producer that's put into it, and it just can't drain the entire area.
Right. And to follow up on that, there's a question that came in for you that was asking about the porosity ranges that were in the example field that you showed in Oklahoma County.
Yeah, so I mean, I'm using just density porosity for that calculation. So I think the scale has 30%, but in reality, that's what the scale went to. But in reality, most of the wells got up to around like 18%. So it's pretty good. It was good porosity in this area, and that field should be a great candidate for secondary recovery. But you guys just got to make sure that your injectors and your producers are located in exactly the same sand body so that you're doing some good.
Oh,
Uh,
right, right.
yeah, and I've seen that on numerous different other fields where, and that, I mean, it's a great point is that people in the past, I mean, maybe all the way up until now, you imagine that the reservoir is a single homogeneous system. You'll map out, let's say you go in, you find a particular sand in there, and people will map that out with an isopath. And so you'll see a 10-foot contour, 50, 25, whatever it is. Okay, that's true. But if you turn that over on its side and you look at it, then you'll see, yeah, there's 10 foot here and 10 foot there. Okay, and that collectively makes a 20-foot interval, but they're not connected.
Right, right. And they're basically discrete lenticular units.
That's right. Yeah,
Oh,
absolutely.
Yeah, so interesting. Well, Steve, how would you start prospecting for an area?
Just basically use a dart.
No.
No. What we do is look at an area. We probably had about 15 projects that never worked out. We hear people locally talking about, oh, this area should have done 20 barrels a day. The operator was an idiot. Well, oil field rumors are great. And so typically what we'll start doing is looking at an area, and then we might go into an old well with a CBL gamma ray, not just to check the casing in the pipe, but also to see if we can see much of a sand. Typically in eastern Kansas, it's all sands. And then we also, in many cases, will drill a test well. And typically, when I develop like those shallow fields, I core every pay in every well in order to map it. Not with logs. We also log every well, but get the actual porosity, permeability. Look for, as Lonnie was talking about, isolated um, reservoirs within the main sand. See what the changes are. See if we can map trends. Cores are great. They're very cheap when you're drilling 210-foot wells or 400-foot wells, essentially. And then if we start to like what we see, we put in a 5 spot and start flooding it. Since most of the fields in eastern Kansas go to water flood pretty quickly, especially nowadays. I mean, back when they were discovered in the early 1900s, you had wells flowing 300 barrels a day, but they quickly lost that energy because they just vented the gas back then. So they quickly, in reality, went to gas flood, then followed by water flood. In our wildcat areas, we just look for areas that have all sorts of indications, but the majors either looked at them in the 60s and 50s and 70s, and no one's looked at it since because the small operators, mid-size operators, they'd rather chase people around who find things than go find them themselves. So it leaves a lot of opportunity.
That's a really good point. Well, we have about um, 30 unanswered questions and, and 90 seconds. So what I'd like to do is ask everyone if your question was not answered, please send them to education@aapg.org and we'll send them on to Lonnie and Steve. And in the meantime, you can ask them and grill them yourself in person in 2 weeks in Tulsa. So you can corner them. And I'd like to let everyone know that our conference, which will feature both Lonnie and Steve and a total of 9 or 10 operators that will share their experience. Also, all types of individuals in a technical track and a business track, and it's just amazing. So please sign up. We discover opportunity and legacy assets, 25th and 26th in February in Tulsa. If you have any questions, email education@aapg.org. We will answer all your questions and share our enthusiasm. And there's a few people have their hands raised. Sorry that we haven't been able to get to all the questions, but it's not too late to type them in the Q&A or, oh, well, okay, it is there, but to email us and we'll forward on the questions. So I just wanted to say thank you to Lonnie and to Steve. Do you have any final thoughts that you'd like to share? Lonnie, would you want to go first?
No, thank you everybody for joining in. And I encourage you to send those questions in. I'll certainly be, I know Steve will be too, very happy to answer those. And I believe that we're going to be sending out copies of these presentations to everyone at a certain point. Is that correct, Susan?
Yes, we'll send a copy of a link to the recording. So you'll get that in an email and also a link to be able to register for the workshop. So great.
Fantastic.
Yeah, Steve, do you have any thoughts?
No, just thank everybody for coming. My email and telephone number are on my presentation. If you want to call me directly, I'll be glad to talk anytime.
Fantastic. Well, thank you very much. And I'll see you in 2 weeks in Tulsa. And thank you to all our wonderful audience. And I'll hope to see you there too. Thank you.
Thank you.